recording.
There we go. So that it's recording now. So the colours we're going to be using, or I'm using at least, everybody's got different colours, but they function pretty much the same. I'm going to be using this, which is called Red, and this yellow here. What is that? Because the internet's not great, is there's often a little pause or delay on my demonstration screen, but it does catch up. And I'm going to use this ultramarine blue as well, but not very much of it, and that's really to help with the shadows. Even though pumpkins, are orange, there's some very strong shadow areas there.
Right. Shadow. So that's why you've got.
Yeah. And what we'll be doing, and again, this is a limited palette, and I recommend to everyone, even if you've been painting for many years, is just to limit your palette down, especially for learning more about color, because your three primary colors here, red, yellow and blue, they can go so far. So you can make your secondary colors orange, violet and green, and then you can make what are known as tertiary colors, which are usually your mixes, your kind of grays and browns and things like that. But you can do it with just these three colors. If I were to be starting painting afresh, or someone that's interested in starting, and people do ask me what colors should I get, and I said just get red, yellow, blue and a white, because you'll learn more about the process and about color through doing that. Also with it, why I use those three colors is often I'll go plein air painting outdoors. It means I don't have to take much, but it also means if I end up somewhere, I remember when I was in India, I really wanted to paint and had to go from town to town to find a stationery shop or art shop. And, I ended up finding just three colours in there, thankfully, three primary colours. But it means that pretty much anywhere in the world, you're going to be able to track down those three colours. So they're versatile and essential, really. So I put my colours out.
Richard?
Yes, hi Hannah.
I haven't still got your email that you sent me. You sent me one for yesterday's creative carer session.
Right.
That's coming, not the one today. Sorry,
okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. No, not at all. Let me do that. I'll be back in.
Thanks.
I'll tell you what, I'll put the coffee on. That's the coffee ready. All I have to do is put it in the microwave and we can have a break. Has she put cream on your face? No, we'll put some on. Your face is looking good, Mum. Yeah, it is. And
Hannah, So did
Thank
the
you.
link? Ah, great. And hi, Avi, as well.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Avi. So I think there was a problem with my email or something. Maybe my email's full, but let's have a look. So I'll go back to the main screen now, and I'll just pop everybody on mute,
Okay.
and I'll go through the. Okay, so right, there we go. So we're back on to the main screen and it's recording. So I'll run through quickly what we're doing today. We're going to be painting these pumpkins. These pumpkins were given to us. Well, weren't given to us. We were driving along on the way home last week, and just around the corner there's a little farm, and they were giving away these pumpkins outside. So we got a few of them, and never painted pumpkins before, so I thought it'd be a good idea to do it. And I got up and took some photographs this morning of them in various compositions to try and find a nice balance of light, dark, tone, colour, all of those kind of things. So we've got this composition here. Ideally, I would have made there a little bit more space around the pumpkins, but this was my favourite shot, and I didn't have enough space around it. So we're going to be painting today in a relatively watercolour style with these pumpkins. What we want to do is just to really sort of sketch out our shape, and then slowly build up areas of dark and light. This is recording, so if you have to leave early or if you miss some bits, you can go back to it. I'm using a limited palette again of just 3 colours plus white. And what we want to do when we start something like this, just explain the 2 brushes I'm using. So I've got a medium round brush, and then I've got a smaller round brush here. If you've just got flat brushes, doesn't matter. If you've only got 1 brush, it doesn't matter either. These are synthetic brushes, can be used for oil, watercolour, gouache, acrylic. So when I look at my photograph there, the first thing I want to do is to sketch out some basic shapes in a very fluid. So to do that, what I'm going to do, I am going to make brownie colour from my 3 primary colours. I've taken some yellow to start with, and into my yellow I'm going to add a touch of red to make an orange. You see how powerful that red is. It didn't take much to turn it into an orange, and of course that's going to come in very handy soon. But we want to get something that's close to a burnt sienna or a burnt umber. So to do that, I'm going to add just a touch of blue to the edge there and slowly mix that in. Automatically it's changed it from vivid to something that's much more earthy. I can see it's too yellow for this. I'm just going to add a touch more red, and then go back and add a touch more blue. I'm a great fan of earth colours with painting. Burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw sienna, yellow ochre, and in oil painting I tend to use them a lot, but you don't actually have to use them because you can mix something very, very close by using these 3 primary colours. So this here is the colour I'm looking for. It's a kind of a almost like a caramel type colour. And I want this to be extremely thin because I'm going to be drawing my composition with it. I don't want too much paint on my brush. So looking at my pumpkins, and again, we want to sort of break away from trying to get things absolutely perfect. We're looking for a general kind of sketch of the scene. And how I would start it is I would start on my left-hand side here and just very lightly, again, for me, that's too much paint on there, is do a kind of a sketch of this shape. What we're looking at is not items or objects or even pumpkins at this stage. We're looking at shapes and how they fit into the scene. By painting in this light, fluid way to start with, it means that then when we start to add richer colours on top and darker colours, we're not bound by the drawing that we put down. So we're just doing a loose idea of the shapes we have here. And you're looking at how those shapes are kind of existing within the space of the photograph. And we go back and adjust them as we go along. Look at also the line across, say this line across the bottom of where the pumpkins are. Are they in a sort of a straight line? Is one higher than the other? So for me, this end one on the furthest right is higher. And then we again look at the top of the pumpkins as well to see the size of them in comparison to the others. We're not going to worry about the background or anything for the time being, and it's just getting these basic shapes in and trying to gauge the sizes of our pumpkins in comparison to other ones. So for me, my larger pumpkin over here isn't quite large enough. But again, it's something that I can adjust as we go along. Now, the next thing I want to do is look at starting to get some tone and colour into the painting, and seeing that orange is our dominant colour within the pumpkins. I'm going to just make an orange here. I'm not going to dilute it down with blue as much as I did in this first wash. I want quite a vivid orange. So I've taken some yellow and some red. The yellow really kind of bullies the red really bullies the yellow. It's extremely strong. And that's why when I mix oranges, I tend to start with the yellow and add the red into it, rather than the other way around, because you'd be there all day trying to make an orange. Okay, so we've got a nice vivid orange here. I do want to tone it down slightly, and like we've done with the outline colour, to tone this down we're going to add blue, and this brings in the theory or idea of complementary colours. So orange and blue, when they're together next to each other, are complementary colours. They make the other one stand out and seem stronger. You'll see it in a lot of nature and a lot of art as well. It's a lovely combination, as is red and green or yellow and violet. But when we take a small amount of a complementary colour and actually add it into a mix, rather than complementing it, it actually cancels the intensity of each out. And so by taking a small amount of blue and adding it into our orange, it's actually sort of toned the orange down, made it slightly more earthy. And I've got this colour here. It's a subtle shift, but we want to be dealing in subtleties when painting like this. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that my brush wet. I want to, for my shapes, for my pumpkins, I'm just going to lay in some of this light orange colour. You can see that it's very watercolour how I'm using it. I'm not adding any white to it because I want that light and transparency. We will then add darker tones and shades on top, but this is the fluidity I'm looking for. Again, just sort of feeling those pumpkin shapes out. Now the next pumpkin along that I'm going to do is slightly redder, but for the time being I'm not going to concern myself with that. I'll do that in the next layer. So again, I'm just feeling the shape of this pumpkin out with the brush. And then also for the one on the right as well. So I've got my basic shapes for my pumpkins here and sort of filled in the space inside them. The next thing I want to do is look at defining those shapes in 3D by adding some shadows, adding some darker tones that will help sort of shift them towards things that are not just yellow circles across the page, but are in fact items, objects within the space that we see. It's a really important element still life painting in general, but especially still lives, that you want to create the shape through shadows, through dark and light. We've put down here this yellow, and it actually looks more like the yellow that's kind of inside the pumpkin than the actual pumpkins themselves, but we want this as our lightest tone. So the next thing we'll do is try to make some dark shadow colours. Grab some when we make our shadows, it was something I was explaining earlier, where we're relying on the use of complementary colours, and in this case, blue, to create the shadows in our still lives. I was told, and I tend to go with this theory, that when you have a shadow of something, it often contains elements of its complementary colour. So if, for example, you had a lemon, the complementary colour of yellow is violet. So in the shadow of the lemon on the table, if you had that slightly more violet, but it would help sort of create that sense of realism. Equal for, let's think of something that's red, a strawberry, for example, that in the shadow you have an element of blue in there, of green in there. Same for oranges, you would have a bit of blue, and in our case, pumpkins. So you have that little bit of blue in there. We've got this vivid orange here. I want to make it slightly redder, so I'm going to incorporate some more red into that. I'm going to take a little bit more red. I want it to be much more to the sort of fiery orange side than the yellow orange side. Now into that, I'm going to add some blue and make this lovely dark brown colour. It's difficult to tell what colour it is actually, because it sometimes looks green, sometimes looks brown, but nonetheless it's a lovely dark. I'm just going to add some more blue in there to darken it even more. A little bit more. A little bit more. So that mix again was yellow with red in it, and when you've got a very red orange, then add small amounts of blue to it, just to turn it into this wonderful brown colour. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look on my pumpkin, the shadows. I tend to start at the side. I'll demonstrate how. I'm going to start with this one in the middle here, just with this dark colour. I've realised that it's not quite saturated enough, so I've gone back in to try and make some more of that dark. That's more like it. So I'm starting on the base of my pumpkin, and following the shape around where the shadow is. The shadow actually comes down here as well. And then starts to come up into the pumpkin. You can use a wet brush to blend it slightly. And what I'll do at the bottom of where I've put that shadow in, or the beginning of the shadow, is I've rinsed my brush out. And I just want to take a damp brush and just at the bottom, just soften that out into the background. We'll be working and building layers as we go. So this is one of those layers. I'm adding a bit more red into my mix here. And then a little bit more blue. And I'm going to go to the larger pumpkin now and just try and define that shape of it at the bottom. You can see on that there's actually shadow sort of coming off the other pumpkin cast onto this one. So I'm putting that in too. And then just blending it slightly. Again at the bottom, damp brush just to soften those shadow lines. I'm now going to go over to the pumpkin over on the right. Just put the base, constantly having to add more blue into my orange. Keep that colour dark. And like before, just rinse my brush out slightly and just kind of soften those edges. So here are the basics of where our shadows are. We're still building our image up. So we're not worrying about whether we've got the colour right or the shadows in the right places. As you piece the painting together, we can adjust it as we go along. For me, the shadow areas aren't nearly dark enough, but the next thing we want to do is to try to bring our pumpkins much more to the orange that we see in them. I'm going to wipe away the colour I've mixed here. And we're going to go in with our next layer on top. So when we look at the orange of the pumpkins, it's much richer than the yellowy orange we've put down here. Now, to me, that says that it needs more red in it. So we've taken the yellow and added some red. This is much closer to a pumpkin colour now. But like with all of our oranges, we've got to tone it down slightly so it's not too vivid. So here's where just a touch of blue, smallest amount, and I'll show you how much. I've just put it on the side there. It really is the smallest amount. Just adding it in there, just so that that orange isn't too vivid. Right. So I'm adding some more water to that. And I'm going to look at my pumpkins and see where I want to start placing this more vivid orange. For me, it's always on the side, on the left-hand side where the shadow is. So if we start there, and I'm going to start on this pumpkin on my right. Again, you can kind of layer it over where you've had the shadows and the previous colours. Try not to sort of fill in the shapes, but just loosely blocking the colour. You can see already that that orange is much, much closer. Now what I've done, I've just rinsed a lot of that intense colour off my brush. And just with a damp-ish brush is to again soften the edges. So I've gone to where I put that intense orange down to the line where it meets the previous layer. And I'm just softly blending it in. The transition doesn't have to be perfect, but you see by doing that, it gives it that three-dimensional element, that kind of curve. We'll leave that one for the moment. We'll come back to it. And we'll move on to the next pumpkin, and again start in a very similar way, and just with the brush feeling that shape out, or that curve. And then rinse the brush out, get rid of some of the excess water, and with a damp brush just try and soften that edge. At the moment we use, but as we move on we will actually adjust the colours of each pumpkin because they're very different. Right, so I'm going to go over to my larger pumpkin over here on the left and do a similar approach. So starting in the left corner of it, just feeling out the shape. And again, getting my brush, rinsing it out, and with a damp brush just lightly blending between those two tones. So what we'll do, we'll let that settle, and in a minute or so have a break, let the paint settle down, and then we'll go in after the break and really start to define those shapes more, add a little bit more nuance in there between the colours, and start to build the pumpkins up. At the moment we don't have our stalks on there, and you'll see when you add the stalks that it helps to sort of almost pin them into place. We'll also as well add a bit of background. We won't try and sort of copy all of the creases and stuff in the background, but just have a light tone going on there, which again will help bring the pumpkins to life. But for the time being, what we'll do, we'll have a little break. Let's have a 10-minute break. I've got to go and blow my nose and take some more medicine, and change the water. But I will be back soon, and then we'll have some questions, or any questions you can't. See you soon. Hi everyone, I'm back. Has anybody got any questions before we move forward? You're all on mute, so you'll have to unmute if you want to ask a question. If not, we'll carry on. So, as I said before, what we'll be doing at this next stage is just really trying to define and refine our shapes and the space that the pumpkins are in. The next thing we're going to do is look at a background and get in a little background in. So let's have a look. I'm going to make the screen bigger again. So at the moment, our pumpkins are kind of just floating in space a little bit. And we want to get a light background in, but that slightly careful about the colour we're going to do it with. We don't want to have it too vivid. We want to keep it very, very light, a very light wash. We also want to be mindful of the actual colour of the pumpkins and the colour we're going to add into it. So I'm going to use a very, very dull violet colour to put in the background. Now, to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some blue. I have this blue here. I want it very thin. So again, this is in a sort of a watercolour style that we're painting. So I've taken some blue, and into the blue, I'm going to add a touch of red. Like when I mix oranges, when I mix a violet, I add the red into the blue because the red is very powerful. As you see, automatically it turns that blue into this lovely dull violet colour. Now, I don't want it just to be violet. I want to tone that violet down. So I'm going to again rely on complementary colours. So orange and blue are complementary colours. So are yellow and violet. Now my violet isn't very vivid there, and that's for a reason. But normally when you have yellow and violet together, they really complement each other. However, if you take a small amount of that yellow and add it into a violet, what happens is it creates this wonderful grey colour. It looks on the screen almost black. It's one of my favourite mixes for creating dark colours. If anybody's used Payne's Grey before, which is a watercolour and oil paint and acrylic, Payne's Grey is usually a mix like this. It's a proper neutral grey, so it shows that we don't need black at all. Now with this again, I want to be very, very careful about how much we're actually putting on the page, because once you put a dark colour down, it's extremely difficult to lift it off. Before I do the background, I'm going to do the foreground or the surface the pumpkins are on. Even though in our photograph it's a kind of a warmy brown colour, to start with I'm going to just lightly put this on, and that was almost, you see how I've put that on, it's almost too strong a colour. I want it very, very light like that. So I'll dip my brush in water just to thin that down. I'll take it right to the base of the pumpkins because it will incorporate into the shadows. I'm just washing this delicate wash of grey onto page. What we're trying to do is get rid of or block out any white from the paper. If you're working on a different colour paper, it doesn't matter. It's still the same thing. We're trying to block that undercut. Now, for this bit here, in between the pumpkins, you can see where the table ends. I want that extremely light, just tinting the page. And again, up for the background. And this time I'm going to use vertical strokes downwards just to create a little bit of difference. I'll bring it right to the pumpkins. Doesn't matter if it overlaps them slightly. What we don't want to do is to sort of paint around things as if we're colouring in. We want to have it very loose and light. So again, those vertical stripes coming down. Even if you're leaving little bits of that white background coming through, that's good. And we're not looking at any sort of individual characteristics that are in the background. We're just getting the tone in. So what that's done, it's helped us really see how our pumpkins or our objects are within the space. And it's helped create a greater sense of light and dark. Up until we put that in, the background was by far the brightest element of the painting, and that's because it was white. Now we've added that into there, it's helped us gauge really where the light orange elements are in the pumpkins. So the next thing we want to do whilst we're still working with these grey dark tones is I want to mix up again that colour. So I created a violet. I'm going to mix it into where I'd mixed before. Created a violet by having blue, and into the blue adding a bit of red. Okay, go easy with your red. Need a bit more blue in there. You see that's turned into a beautiful deep purple. It's not what I'm looking for. So I've added some more blue to it. And now I've got this deep colour. Which is the violet. And I put their complementary colour yellow to try and create that dark colour again. There we are. So we've gone back to creating this sort of grey black colour. And it's at this point we want to start looking at our shadows again under the pumpkins. This is more blue than it is orange. And going back to what I said about having in the shadows of things something that it's complementary. So for blue, for orange, our complementary is blue. For this, I'm going to take my smaller brush and just pick up a bit of that colour and go back in and where my shadows are on the pumpkin. So I'm starting on this far right pumpkin here. And right in the darkest area, just adding this shadow. Bring it up here a bit. And as I've done before, just taking a damp brush. I'm going to use my larger brush for this, but you can use the smaller. Again, just soften that line, try and blend them slightly. And again at the bottom too. I'll move on to the next pumpkin. I'm looking for that shadow area beneath. And again, with that damp brush, just soften the edges. And then I move over to the right hand pumpkin. With a damp brush, and just soften the lines. Now, by adding this very dark colour in, what it does, it shows that if that's the darkest colour, it's quite a big leap then from that to our oranges. So that's where we need to pay a little bit more attention, is to try and match in tonal value that dark and the next step of the orange between that and this very light orange here. So to do that, again, I'm just going to wipe away my parts of my shadow colour. I'm going to keep some of it on one side. Is I really want to get a very deep kind of browny orange colour. need to put out a bit more yellow. So I've put some yellow here, and into my yellow I'm going to put a touch of red. Need some more yellow if that red has overpowered it. So I've got this intense reddy orange colour now. And I'm not going to dilute this very much with water to start with. I want to follow the shape on my pumpkin over here on the right, and where my shadows are, again, just go over that. And like we've done before, just rinse the brush out. Get rid of the excess water. And then lightly just blend the edge of that into the previous layer. So the intensity of the colours starting to match what we see in the photograph. But like with all paintings, it's a matter of building up these layers as we go along. So I've got that intense colour again, and I'm going to go into my second pumpkin, the middle pumpkin, and do exactly the same. So I'm following the shape around. Slowly bringing it in. And then with that damp brush, so rinsing the brush out, getting rid of the excess water. Just softening the edges to create that blend. And now I'll move over to the pumpkin on the far left. Now this one's slightly less orange than the others. I'm still doing a similar treatment to it, but when I blend it, I'm going to try and blend it slightly more. So I've got that damp brush. Softening the edges. So now again they're starting to come together a little bit more, but we still need a darker tone. Now, how we're going to make that again is to keep our orange here and adding some more red into it. Need a bit more yellow. So we've got a strong, intense orange. Now going back to our use of complementary colours, into that I'm going to add a bit of oranges complementary, which is blue. Just add that into the mix. And you can see it's turning like a nice brown colour. And what I want to do with that colour, going on my right hand pumpkin, just follow that edge around. Rinse off my brush slightly. With a damp brush, just try and soften those edges. I'll move on to middle pumpkin and do exactly the same. So following that curve around. And with a damp brush, soften the edges slightly. The left the far left pumpkin. Let's soften the edges. I'm using a bit more water on this end one just to make the tone lighter. Now we've got our basic tones and we've created our basic kind of spheres in that sense for the pumpkins. Our next move is to actually put the stalks in, and what they will do, they will help us then see where on the pumpkin we want to add some of these lines that come kind of around and down the pumpkin and really help give them shape. Now to put the stalks in is where we're going to actually add a little bit of green to our mix. So the green that we want to make is going to be very, very light. I'm going to take some yellow, clear this violet quickly. So taking some yellow, and into the yellow I'm going to add some blue to create this green. Looking at the green, rather than light, it actually wants to be slightly darker because it's only really the shadows of the stalks we want to concern ourselves with. So I'm just adding more blue to that green. And this next part will be very similar to the first stage we had, where we were just lightly drawing our outlines of our pumpkins. So we're going to do the same here with the stalks. So I've taken this green here and we're going to use complementaries again. So our green and red together are complementary colours. They look great together, but when you add a small amount of intensity out, we want our green to be slightly earthier than we can make. So by adding a small amount, tiny amount of red into our mix, we'll get this slightly or earthy kind of green going on. Right. So for this part, I want the mix to be very fluid, very watercolor-like. I'm going to look at where the stalks are on the pumpkin and just lightly sketch out some shapes. So I'm starting with my middle. And to start with, it's no more than that. So adding a little bit of the shape in there. Now I'll move over to my next stalk. For this one, I'm going to just kind of do a block of colour rather than lines. Like so. And then over for this end one. Again, I'm not trying to draw it exactly, but just look at the shape of what I see. And get an approximation of it in. I'm going to try and refine this middle one slightly. Sometimes painting is very different to drawing, because with drawing you have that line, and so you're able to define shapes through line, whereas painting you're kind of defining shapes through shapes, because your brush is making shapes rather than lines. So this is what I'm doing here. I'm just putting in some bits of tone through different shapes and brush marks. Now, for the time being, I'm happy with that. But whilst I've got this green colour, I just want to add a bit more blue to it, and I'm going to go down again to the base of my pumpkins and add a little bit of that bluey green underneath them to help with the shadows. Sometimes shadows need a few layers. Excuse me a minute. Sorry, my dad was at the studio window. So I'm taking some of this green and actually adding it down to the shadows again. I want to always be adjusting that dark and light element. So now with the pumpkins, what we want to do is to look at creating some of those unique shapes that they have on them. From there, again, we can gauge where we can add little highlights or more light, more dark. And to create those shadows coming down, those lines coming down, we really want to have a nice dark colour, but not too dark, but it's close to black. We want it to still be in the kind of the orange zone. So I'm mixing up some of this older orange I had here. That was a yellow. And a bit of red. And into it we added a touch of blue as well. And I'm going to use my small brush just to start trying to create some of these ridges, lines coming down. The most prominent ones are in our centre pumpkin. I'm going to see if I've got a dark enough mix. I'm using my small brush and just doing the kind of, rather than solid lines all the way down, just doing these kind of broken lines. The lines almost create these segments. When you do have them broken like this, it's a much more naturalistic way of portraying things rather than just having a dark, solid line all the way down. A little bit more blue in there. I'm going to have a look on this larger pumpkin here. See how it just really gives some shape. There, I think I've gone a little bit too strong with that line, so to get rid of that, or just to soften it, dip my brush in the water. And just lightly tapped over the lines, just to blend them in and soften them a bit against the background. Moving now over to this pumpkin on the right. I can't see as many lines in this one, but I'm going to put them in anyway. And just kind of, where there aren't any, just kind of imagine some, just to help give it that sense of three dimension. on the middle pumpkin, the ridges are very strong up near the stalk. So just add a little bit more around here. Again, soften them lightly with a wet brush. Now, what's apparent to me, and it's not with the pumpkins, it's actually the background that needs a little bit more at the top here. I see we're kind of running out of time a little bit, but I'm going to very quickly, and if this is too quick for you, please do go back and have a look later. And so I just want to make this background up here slightly darker. It's too light at the moment. So I'm going to make a violet colour with some red and blue. And into that, just add a bit of yellow to tone it down. Create this kind of brown colour. Okay, using a wash. Let's come down vertically. Creating a stronger background for them. This is something that I would, if I was continuing to paint, constantly adjust and readjust. And bring it right down to the pumpkins again. I don't want it to look as though things are separate from each other. And if that means bringing some of the colour from the background over into the pumpkins and vice versa, to create that, that's what I'll do. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same in the foreground as well. Put in a light background in to start with. It's always more preferable than putting a dark one, because at least with the light one you can do this, so you can go and add a darker background in later. So just going to take this darker colour and wash it into the foreground. stop there for now with the background. What time is it? So it's 1:45 now. Probably go for about another 10 minutes. This is where we're going to actually bring in some elements of white, just for a few highlights and a little bit of opacity too. And then what I'll do, I'll explain where I would go next. As per usual, I've run out of time, but where I would go next and what needs to be done to bring it more to life. So I'm just putting a little bit of white out now. We haven't introduced it yet. And what I want to do is, on the pumpkins, just add some little highlights here and there. So I'm going to mix up an orange again, taking some yellow and a little bit of red, some more yellow there. And into that, just start adding small amounts of white. You see, as soon as we introduce white to this painting, it completely changes everything. If you don't have white, don't worry about it. You can sort of skip this stage. But slowly just adding a little bit of white and creating this pinky orange colour. Now here and there on the pumpkin, and I'm going to start on the middle pumpkin. Just want to gauge out what this looks like. Yeah, that's good. I want to be using a dry brush here. I don't want it too wet because I want the paint just to kind of skim over the surface slightly. And what I'll do is, where there are light areas of the pumpkin, you can see there, the camera's not picking it up so well, but just by adding these little highlights here and there, you start to create an interesting new layer to the painting. Here, you've got this area of light coming down on one of the ridges. So the ridges aren't just dark, they've got this touch of light to them. And by adding that, by using white, it helps bring it alive much more than using just the paper alone or the thinness of the paint to define that for us. So again, I'm going to look where there are some of these ridges. And very carefully, we don't want to overdo the white because it does change, it changes everything. I've made many mistakes before by doing a painting and introducing white to it and regretting it. So I take it very easy. I'm going to look at this light patch here on the larger pumpkin on the left and just drag a bit of this white over the top of the surface. And again over here too on this painting, on this pumpkin side. And here as well. Some watercolour artists and gouache artists as well only use white in these circumstances. So they leave it right until the end and just add a few highlights here and there. We can also use it just to sort of define our shape of the pumpkin slightly as well. But for me, I like it used in a very dry way. So the brush marks just sit on top of the surface, and the paint is just sitting on top of the surface rather than blending into those layers beneath. Now that I've added the lighter colours, it's automatically showing to me that elements of the pumpkins aren't dark enough. And you can probably see that clearly now, that this shadow here and this shadow here and this shadow here, they're just not dark enough. And some of those oranges as well, now we've got those lighter lights in there, they've lost themselves. So if I was to continue this painting, I would just really focus on wrestling with those elements of dark and light and trying to bring back those shadows as strongly as possible. Don't have time to do it now, but that would definitely be something I do. I'm going to just attempt it very quickly on the middle pumpkin and see if we can get somewhere with it. So taking some blue and mixed in a little bit of red with it. And I wonder if I add a tiny bit of white into it to make it opaque, whether that will help me. A little bit more red. And now some yellow. So here again, I'm using a similar technique to what I was doing with the white, and using a dry brush, just dragging the paint over the surface rather than having it wet and blending it in. And you could see already that is helping to give those shadows a little bit more definition. Yeah, so I'm really just rubbing the drier brush over the surface to create that dark shadow colour. Each time I do a painting in these workshops, I'm kind of starting afresh, so I haven't pre-planned it. And I just love working out these things as I go along and as we go along with it, because it's in those challenges that you learn the most, and how you think, oh, I might just try doing it this way and see if that helps. And in this case, adding the shadows in this way is definitely helping to give the pumpkins more shape. They need a lot more work, but it's I'm much happier than I was a couple of minutes ago. So. Now, because of time, I am going to have to stop there. But as I said, it is something that needs that building up of layers. There may have been shortcuts along the way that I could have taken that would have got me closer to where I wanted to be. But it's all a learning process. Elements that I've used in painting pears, for example, could be used in this, but they're very different fruits. The lighting is very different as well. So when we paint, a lot of it's just taking a few risks and working it out as we go along. What I would do now with these, if I were to continue, definitely work on those shadows, add a bit more orangey red to this dark colour here, bringing it into the pumpkins. I'd work on the background again a little bit more to help set the scene. Again, work on the orange here, make it a little bit redder. And just fiddle about, really. Fiddle about until you think that looks good enough, or there seems to be a harmony there. There's not too much light, there's not too much dark. Again, the shapes of the pumpkins in many ways are irrelevant at some point. The key is, does the dark and light balance help give something shape? Does it look natural? Does it look as though it is considered and thought through? And often the history of that consideration and that tweaking helps really give a painting character. But I would, if I had time, continue and work on this probably for another couple of hours. But for now, that is all I can afford to do. But I hope you saw that just at the end, by then going in and adding those shadows again into it, that it gave them more life. It was a kind of a lifeline to them. But yeah, how did everybody else get on? You're all muted, so you'll have to unmute.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, Sarah.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. It was lovely.
Good, good.
And I think I finally understood that the pumpkin needed more red in it.
Yes.
To get that red, to get that pumpkin colour. It was
Yeah.
eluding me for a long time. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, you know, I'm pleased with the result. So
Good.
that's good.
Good.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And a lot of it is so that what you then take to your next painting, that as you're doing it, you remember these little things and think,
Yeah.
so it's, this is that exercise. But, even for myself, and then when I go on to paint something completely different this afternoon, little elements of this will sort of resonate in my head, and it's those tweaking and adjustment, and is there enough red in that orange, is there too much yellow?
Yeah. I was wondering about the brushes you were using.
Yes.
Are they, what have you got, some very fine brushes, or?
No, these are called, if I try and hold them up a little bit more, or maybe in here, that's better. These are Pro Arts, which are quite a popular brush make. you could get from Cassart and stuff like that. But these are called ProArt Bristline. So I think that's their trademark thing for. It's a synthetic brush. Most synthetic brushes are very are not very strong, whereas these Bristline is that they're trying to imitate bristle brushes, classic oil painting brushes. Now, for me, they're great, and I use them a lot for gouache because they're somewhere in between a bristle and a synthetic brush. That one costs about £8, the big one, and that's smaller one is for about £4.
So sorry, I kind of missed it. It was ProArt, and it was non-bristle.
ProArt synthetic bristling. I can email.
Oh, okay.
I can email the link, Sarah, for where I got them from. I recommend them. The great thing about these as well, using natural hair brushes, which I use a lot for oil and stuff, is that they wear down so quickly. But these, because they're synthetic, I mean, these will keep going for years and years and years and years.
Oh, okay, great, lovely.
So they're very good investment.
Thank you. Thanks.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, thank you for coming, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you.
And I'll publish the recording later. It takes hours to kind of process. It's doing it now. But like I say, with the pumpkins, I'm happy in the direction they're going, but not satisfied where they are now. But I can definitely see them starting to come to life. So, if you want to continue with yours or start another one, whatever. But I hope you enjoyed those little things that we learned along the way.
It was lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
Have
I
a
signed
lovely
in for
weekend.
hi everyone. I signed in for the last 20 minutes, half an hour, because I'm going to be doing it on Zoom. But I learned so much within that space, and all the tips you've given. So really, I'm excited to do this piece. It's lovely.
Yeah.
Really, really amazing. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Can I just ask, were they oils or acrylics?
This is gouache.
Oh, gouache. Okay, lovely.
Yeah, this is gouache, but you can use and we painted very much in a watercolor way right up until the end, where it started out a bit of opaque stuff. Yeah, but gouache, but you can use watercolor, acrylic. You can even use oil doing it like in this way. But it was very fluid to start with, and then as we got on, we started to add a little bit of white into it.
Yeah, brilliant,
right.
Lovely.
Yeah, so,
thank you so much.
So hopefully,
have a good week, everyone. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
Hopefully the video from this the replay will be, depends on how long it takes to process, either tonight or tomorrow morning.
Okay. By weekend I'll have started definitely and finished. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much.
See you later, everyone. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.